The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. Elias Thorne, a titan of industry, stepped out of his sleek vehicle, a rare moment of solitude after a grueling day. His personal assistant, a quiet individual named Alex, was a few paces behind, carrying a small satchel. The usual security detail had been dismissed early, a decision Elias would soon regret. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A dark van screeched to a halt, doors sliding open with a menacing hiss. Figures in black, their faces obscured, spilled out, moving with practiced efficiency. Elias, caught off guard, felt a rough hand clamp over his mouth, a sharp sting in his arm as a sedative took hold. His world began to tilt. As he fought against the encroaching darkness, Elias saw Alex. The assistant had dropped the satchel, his eyes wide, a look of pure terror on his face. Elias' last conscious thought was a flicker of disappointment. Even his most trusted aide was helpless in the face of such brutal force. Then oblivion. Elias awoke to a throbbing headache and the damp chill of a concrete floor. His wrists were bound and a rough sack covered his head. The air was thick with the smell of stale earth and fear. He could hear muffled voices, distant and distorted, but no familiar sounds. He was deep underground, far from the polished towers of his empire. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at him. He was Elias Thorne, a man who commanded respect and wielded immense power. Yet here he was, utterly vulnerable. He strained against his bonds, but they held firm, digging into his skin. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened, who would dare. A sudden jolt as the sack was ripped from his head. Blinding light assaulted his eyes, then slowly, the crude outlines of his prison came into focus. A single bare bulb illuminated a small, grim cell. And then he saw him. Alex, huddled in a corner, equally bound, his face pale and etched with despair. The kidnappers, burly and humorless, entered the cell. They spoke in clipped, harsh tones, demanding information Elias didn't have, making threats he couldn't comprehend. Elias, despite his fear, tried to maintain a facade of defiance, but inside he was crumbling. He glanced at Alex, expecting to see the same terror, perhaps even a plea for help. But Alex was different. While his body language conveyed fear, there was a subtle stillness in his eyes, a flicker of something Elias couldn't quite place. When one of the kidnappers roughly shoved Elias, Alex flinched, but his gaze remained fixed, observing, analyzing, rather than simply reacting. It was a detail Elias in his drugged state almost missed. The kidnappers left, slamming the heavy door shut, plunging them back into dimness. Elias slumped against the wall, defeated. "This is it, Alex," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "They'll never let us go." Alex remained silent, his eyes still, but Elias felt a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the air around him, a barely there tension that spoke of something other than despair. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of fear and hunger. The kidnappers were relentless, their demands escalating, their patience wearing thin. Elias, weakened and disoriented, found himself drifting, his once sharp mind dulled by the constant pressure. He watched Alex, who seemed to endure the torment with a quiet resilience that both puzzled and irritated him. Alex never spoke, never complained. He simply existed, a shadow in the corner of the cell. Yet, Elias occasionally caught him in moments of intense focus. His eyes darting around the cell, assessing the walls, the door, the movements of their captors. It was an almost imperceptible shift, a professional scrutiny that seemed out of place for a personal assistant. One night, as Elias shivered from the cold, Alex shifted closer, just enough to offer a sliver of warmth. Their eyes met in the gloom. In Alex's gaze, Elias saw not fear, but a deep, unwavering resolve. It was a silent promise, a flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness, a message that resonated deeper than any spoken word. "I am here. I will not abandon you." The opportunity presented itself during a shift change, a brief moment of laxity as one guard replaced another. Alex, who had been meticulously tracking their routines, chose his moment. As the new guard fumbled with the heavy keys, Alex, with a sudden explosive burst of movement, lunged. It was a blur. Alex moved with a speed and precision that defied his earlier demeanor. The first guard, caught completely by surprise, grunted as Alex's bound hands connected with his jaw. The keys clattered to the floor. The second guard, still half asleep, barely registered the attack before Alex's foot connected with his knee, sending him sprawling. Elias watched, stunned, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't the terrified assistant he knew. This was something else entirely, something dangerous and highly trained. But the moment of advantage was fleeting, alarms blared, and heavy footsteps thundered towards their cell. The brief, chaotic struggle ended as quickly as it began. More kidnappers, armed and furious, burst into the cell. Alex, despite his incredible burst of speed, was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. He was tackled, pinned, and brutally beaten. Elias cried out, a raw, involuntary sound of horror as he watched his assistant endure the savage assault. Yet even as he was pummeled, Alex's eyes remained locked on Elias for a split second. There was no fear, no pain, only a fierce, unyielding determination. It was a silent message, a defiant spark that ignited a desperate hope in Elias's chest. This man, his quiet assistant, was clearly more than he seemed. The kidnappers dragged Alex away, leaving Elias alone in the cell, the air still vibrating with the echoes of the struggle. Elias stared at the spot where Alex had been, a new kind of fear mingling with a burgeoning sense of awe. He had seen a glimpse of steel, a hidden strength in Alex that promised not only survival, but retribution. The kidnappers, now wary, subjected Alex to a brutal interrogation. Elias could hear muffled shouts, the sickening thud of impacts, and the occasional grunt of pain from the adjacent room. They wanted answers, information they believed Alex possessed, but the sounds indicated only resistance, never compliance. Hours passed, stretching into an eternity. Elias paced his small cell, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and a strange, fierce pride. He knew Alex was enduring unimaginable pain, yet he also knew with a certainty that defied logic that Alex would not break. This wasn't just an employee. This was a fortress of will. When they finally dragged Alex back into the cell, he was barely conscious, his face swollen and bruised, a thin trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. He collapsed onto the cold floor, but even then, his eyes, though heavy-lidded, found Elias's, and in that silent exchange, Elias saw it. An unspoken message. They got nothing. Despite the undeniable display of Alex's capabilities, a seed of doubt began to sprout in Elias's mind. Why hadn't Alex revealed his true nature sooner? Why had he allowed them to be captured, to endure this torment? Was this a setup? Was Alex somehow involved with their captors, playing a long, cruel game? He watched Alex, who lay still, recovering from the beating. The quiet, unassuming assistant he had known for years now seemed like a stranger, a man with a dangerous secret. Elias felt a surge of betrayal, a cold knot in his stomach. He had trusted Alex implicitly, and now that trust was shattered. "Who are you, Alex?" Elias whispered, his voice raw. Alex didn't stir, didn't respond. Elias slumped against the wall, the weight of his suspicion heavier than his physical bonds. He was trapped, not just by the kidnappers, but by the unsettling mystery of the man beside him. Days later, Alex, still recovering, but moving with renewed purpose, took another calculated risk. During a meal delivery, as the guard carelessly leaned against the cell door, Alex, with a sudden powerful kick, sent the door swinging inward, catching the guard off balance. This time, Alex didn't try to escape. Instead, he quickly disarmed the stunned guard, taking his communication device. Before the other guards could react, Alex smashed the device against the wall, rendering it useless. He then retreated, allowing the other kidnappers to rush in, leaving them momentarily blind. Elias watched, a new understanding dawning. Alex wasn't just trying to escape. He was systematically dismantling their captors' capabilities, piece by piece. The risk was immense, the consequences of failure dire. But Alex moved with a chilling precision, a silent architect of their liberation. As Alex lay recovering from another retaliatory beating, his mind drifted. He saw flashes of a different life, the dust of a distant land, the roar of gunfire, the camaraderie of a tightly knit unit. He remembered the grueling training, the impossible missions, the faces of those he had fought alongside, and those he had lost. He had left it all behind, seeking a quiet life, a mundane existence where the only battles were spreadsheets and schedules. He had found peace in anonymity, in serving a man like Elias, who, despite his immense wealth, seemed genuinely decent. But the past, it seemed, was never truly gone. Now that past was his only weapon. It promised himself he would never return to that life. But Elias was in danger. And Alex knew, deep in his bones, that he was the only one who could get them out. The quiet assistant was gone, replaced by the ghost of a soldier, ready to fight for the man he was sworn to protect. Alex spent the next few days in a state of heightened awareness, observing every detail. He memorized the guards' patrol patterns, the creaks in the floorboards, the subtle hum of the ventilation system. He noted the weak points in the cell's construction, the blind spots in the surveillance. His mind was a complex map, charting every variable. He began to communicate with Elias through a series of subtle gestures, a tap on the floor, a shift in posture. Elias, initially confused, slowly began to pick up on the silent language, a desperate hope blossoming in his chest. Alex was building a plan, a meticulous blueprint for their freedom, right under their captors' noses. The plan was audacious, relying on split-second timing and perfect execution. It would require Elias's cooperation. A level of physical exertion he hadn't experienced in years, and a leap of faith into the unknown. But as Alex silently conveyed the final pieces of the puzzle, Elias knew, with an unwavering certainty, that this was their only chance. Among their captors was a young guard, barely more than a boy, his eyes haunted by a fear that mirrored Elias's own. He was not like the others, not hardened by cruelty. Alex had observed him, noted his hesitation, the way he flinched at the more brutal commands. This was the crack in their formidable facade. One night, as the young guard brought their meager rations, Alex, with a voice barely above a whisper, spoke to him. Not threats, not pleas, but a simple, stark truth about the path he was on, the lives he was destroying. Elias watched, holding his breath, as a flicker of recognition, then fear, crossed the young man's face. The guard said nothing, but as he left, he deliberately left the cell door ajar, just a fraction. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible act of defiance, a silent acknowledgement of Alex's words. It was not enough for immediate escape, but it was a sign, a glimmer of humanity in the darkness, a confirmation that Alex's assessment was correct. The moment arrived. Lex, feigning illness, drew the attention of the two guards on duty. As they cautiously approached the cell, concerned about their valuable captive, Alex sprang. He moved with the speed of a coiled spring, a blur of motion that left the guards disoriented. He didn't engage them directly in a prolonged fight. Instead, he used the environment, the narrow confines of the corridor, against them. One guard slipped on a strategically placed puddle of water, while the other stumbled over a loose grate. Alex had subtly loosened days before. They fell, momentarily incapacitated. Elias, following Alex's silent instructions, was already moving, scrambling through the not-open cell door. The sounds of the struggle behind him were intense, but Alex's voice, sharp and commanding. Cut through the chaos. Run, Elias, now. Elias, propelled by a newfound adrenaline, stumbled through the dark corridors, guided by Alex's whispered directions. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, the furious shouts of the kidnappers echoing through the cramped passages. But Alex was a ghost in the shadows, a master of evasion. He moved with an unnatural fluidity, anticipating every turn, every obstacle. He used the darkness to his advantage, melting into the shadows, creating diversions, leading their pursuers into dead ends. Elias, despite his fear, felt a surge of exhilaration, primal thrill of survival as he witnessed Alex's raw, untamed skill. Suddenly, a figure loomed in front of them. One of the kidnappers, a hulking brute, blocked their path. Alex didn't hesitate. He moved with a brutal efficiency, a series of swift, precise strikes that rendered the larger man unconscious before he could even react. Elias watched, awestruck, as his quiet assistant transformed into a force of nature. As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, Elias felt a profound shift within himself. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of awe and gratitude. He had spent his life accumulating wealth, believing it was the ultimate power. But here, in the face of true danger, it was utterly meaningless. His life, his very existence, rested in the hands of a man he had dismissed as merely an employee, a quiet shadow in his busy life. Alex, the unassuming assistant, was risking everything, enduring unimaginable pain. Fighting with a ferocity Elias had never dreamed possible. This was true power, true loyalty. Elias looked at Alex, his bruised face illuminated by a distant, flickering light. He saw not just a protector, but a hero, a man who embodied courage and sacrifice. In that moment, Elias understood. His wealth couldn't buy this, couldn't earn this. It had to be given freely and without expectation. They emerged into a vast, cavernous space, a subterranean garage filled with parked vehicles. The exit, a heavy steel door, was visible in the distance. But between them and freedom stood several armed kidnappers, alerted by the commotion. This was it, the final dash. Alex pushed Elias forward. "Go, don't look back," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Elias hesitated, but Alex's eyes, burning with an intense focus, left no room for argument. He ran, his legs burning, the sound of gunfire erupting behind him. Alex became a whirlwind of motion, engaging the kidnappers with a terrifying efficiency. He moved like a dancer, a fighter, dodging bullets, disarming opponents, turning their own weapons against them. Elias risked a glance back, seeing Alex silhouetted against the dim light, solitary figure holding off an entire armed contingent. Elias burst through the steel door, gasping for breath, into the cold night air. The sounds of the struggle intensified behind him, then slowly faded, as Alex, having cleared a path, followed him out, a grim determination on his face. They were free from the immediate confines, but the pursuit had only just begun. A vehicle roared to life from within the garage, tires squealing as it sped out into the night. The kidnappers were relentless, their desire for retribution fueled by their humiliation. Alex pulled Elias into the cover of dense foliage, his senses heightened, listening for every sound, every movement. They moved through the wilderness, a desperate, silent chase under the moonlit sky. Alex, despite his injuries, maintained an incredible pace, guiding Elias through rough terrain, always one step ahead of their pursuers. Elias, pushing past his limits, found a reserves of strength he never knew he possessed, driven by Alex's unwavering resolve. The chase led them to a clearing, a small, open space surrounded by towering trees. The kidnappers, closing in, emerged from the tree line, their weapons raised. There was no more running. This was the final stand. Alex pushed Elias behind a thick tree trunk, shielding him. "I came to save you." Alex roared, his voice raw, echoing through the night. He stepped forward, facing the armed men alone, a figure of defiant courage. He moved with a primal grace, a blur of fists and feet, disarming, incapacitating, fighting with a ferocity that bordered on the superhuman. Elias watched, tears blurring his vision. This was his employee, the quiet man who fetched his coffee, now a warrior, a guardian angel. The battle was brutal, a symphony of grunts and impacts. But Alex, despite being outnumbered, fought with an unyielding spirit, a force of nature protecting his charge. The last kidnapper fell, and silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by Alex's ragged breathing. He stood over the fallen figures, his chest heaving, his body bruised and battered, but his eyes still burning with an intense protective fire. Elias stumbled out from behind the tree, his legs weak, his heart overflowing. He knelt beside Alex, reaching out a trembling hand. "Alex," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my life. Why?" Alex simply looked at him, his gaze softening. "It's what I do," he said, his voice hoarse, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Help arrived soon after, drawn by the distant sounds of the struggle. Elias, safe but shaken, watched as Alex, ever the professional, gave a concise, unemotional account of the events. He refused medical attention until Elias was fully checked, his dedication unwavering even in the aftermath of battle. In the days that followed, Elias Thorne was a changed man. The kidnapping had stripped away his illusions of invincibility, but it had also revealed the extraordinary courage and loyalty of a man he had taken for granted. Blix. true to his nature, remained quiet, unassuming, but their dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Elias offered Alex anything, everything, a new life, a position of immense power within his company, a reward beyond measure. Alex, however, simply smiled. "I'm where I'm supposed to be, Elias," he said. He continued as Elias's assistant, but now his role was understood, his presence a silent assurance. Their bond, forged in the crucible of fear and survival, was unbreakable. Elias learned to see the world differently, to value courage and quiet strength above all else. And sometimes, late at night, he would remember Alex's roar in the clearing. That single, powerful declaration, "I came to save you." It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes walk among us, unseen, until the moment they are needed most. Thank you for reading. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.